Okay, so I'm the therapist of the group, and I would not be doing my job if I didn't read my client. And you're my client tonight, and I read you as needing to take a little relaxation moment, okay? This is stressful stuff. We're being inundated with information about things we're really scared of. So let's just take a minute and take 3 really good deep breaths, like deep, okay? Just relax. Let your body kind of relax, consciously relax your muscles, which have been tight for the last 45 minutes. And just kind of breathe 3 good deep breaths and relax your muscles. Can you do that? Does it feel a little new agey? Too bad, do it. It's good for you. Okay, I'm a therapist and also a professor, so I'm going to do a little education and a little treatment talk with you about what's going on with you and with your kids and really all of us as we encounter pornography. One of the common stereotypes about arousal that leads us to engage with pornography in unhealthy ways, which is every way, is that it's a sexual arousal and only a sexual arousal. But in fact, arousal is highly complicated and highly contextual. And if we use the brain as a kind of model, the brain is made up, as you know, of billions of neurons. And every neuron receives neurotransmitter messages from a dozen or more other neurons. Some of those neurotransmitters are inhibitory, that is, they're designed to keep the neuron they're sending transmitters to from firing. And some are excitatory, and they cause the neuron to fire. And it's the unique blend of these neurotransmitters that are being received by the neuron that will cause it to either fire or to stay dormant. And we say fire, we mean an action potential, but I want you to think of a gun. And if you get the right chemistry, that hammer is being pulled back with each of those excitatory neurons to the point where it just takes a little squeeze and it's going to fire, okay? The same thing's true of us. We have a whole bunch of sources of arousal that can lead us to be primed so that when we encounter pornography, it fires. We stick with it, we spend time looking at it, and we give ourselves over to it. So let's not look at a too simplistic model of arousal related to pornography. Let's look at something a little more complex. Go ahead. Yikes. Wow, okay, there's a lot more than just sex that goes into the arousability of a person. And I don't know if you can read this from the back row, but if you look right next to sex on the left, the box says aggression. And because it's Halloween time, I have to mention something about this. All our psychological research we've done on the media over years and years and years tells us that sex combined with violence is the most arousing media content that you can produce. And guess where you find it most? Not XXX rated hardcore porn. Guess where you find it? It'll be on your TV leading up to Halloween. It'll be in movies like the movie Halloween, which actually has people engaging in sex right before they're murdered. Why? Because it's a double whammy of arousal that pulls that hammer back and makes it far more likely that you're going to give yourself over to pornography if you see it. So I'm just telling you, your everyday television shows that are going to be building up to Halloween have to be monitored because they're going to expose your kids to PG-13 and R-rated movies that have been made for television that are going to increase their likelihood of being aroused. Okay? It's a big one. I'll just mention a couple others here. I want to get beyond this to some things you can do to really help yourself, your loved one, to be careful around pornography arousal. Let me just mention forbidden fruit. This is some interesting research coming out of the Ohio State University. A friend of mine named Brad Bushman was asked to do research when television programming started those little up in the corner warnings about the content, TVMA, TV14. Do you know this? What they did was they researched kids watching television shows without any TVMA or TV14 message when they start, or with having the TVMA, TV14 message when they start. Which group do you think was more aroused? The group with. Why? I'm sorry, nice and loud. It's telling them that they're about to watch something that's not for them if they're young. If they're a little kid and they're watching something TVMA or TV14, It's what we call forbidden fruit. They're aroused by the idea that they're going to watch something that's forbidden. So right there and then, they're already getting primed for the content to arouse them sexually as well as in other ways. I got to mention Mission Impossible. I used to call this the MacGyver effect, but now I call it Mission Impossible because it's a little more recent. I love the idea of monitoring your home and cybersecurity and having passwords and protecting all your devices, but you have to know, especially your young boys, and you tell me if this isn't true, you're an engineer by training, those young boys love an impossible mission. And there is arousal in trying to find out how to get around your security. It's arousing to try to figure out how to get that through that password or around that password. So that too starts to pull the hammer back, making it that much easier when a pornographic image is presented to the child or to the adult to be primed to respond to it in a sexual way. I'm just going to mention boredom real quick, and then I'm going to move on to the next slide. There's a theory in psychology called the optimal arousal theory of motivation, and what that basically says is, if you take even monkeys, primates, and they have all their basic needs met, they're fed, they've got water, everything is good, they get super curious. They start to look around for things to be excited about. They start to look and create ideas, ways of being together that are fun and enjoyable. Kids today have many ways of becoming bored, and often their needs, their basic needs are met. Now, this is not an advertisement to starve your children, although it would take their mind off of porn. I can promise you that. Viktor Frankl tells us that when he was in the concentration camp, all interest in sex stopped because of starvation. It's a real thing. But if your kids are essentially having their needs met and they're bored, that's another way of pulling that hammer back, because they're going to start getting curious, they're going to start getting interested, they might start looking around online, and they're going to find things that are going to satisfy that curiosity. Feeling scared enough yet? You thought you just had to deal with pornography. Now you've got to deal with boredom, these Mission Impossible kids who are trying to get around your passwords, you got the forbidden fruit of those dang TVMA notices, and you've got, of course, things like violence in the media along with the sex. All right, there's a way out. One of the first things we learn in social psychology is fear is a powerful, persuasive message only if it is coupled with a way out, a way to resolve the fear. So as scared as you are, hold on. Okay, next. These are some of the effects that can happen from the use, the abuse, and addiction related to pornography. And in psychology, we don't diagnose things the same way you would. Most of you, when you see someone using porn a lot, you call them addicted. Addiction for us is a pretty high bar, but even use and abuse. And again, in psychology, use is casual looking. Abuse is it's starting to interfere with your functioning. Addiction is it's fully interfering with your functioning as a person in your relationships, in your workplace, and so on. But even use can have some of these negative effects. And I just want to point a few of them out to you. The big one, the one that's looked at a lot in research and meta-analyses show this one is a problem: sexually aggressive and harassing behaviors. Not only are we more comfortable engaging in them if we look at porn in regular occurrence, but we also are more desensitized to other people engaging in them. We don't find it so offensive when someone else is being inappropriate sexually with a colleague at work or with a sibling or whatever it might be. So we lose some of our sensitivity around sexual aggression and harassment. And given the news you've heard about recently with the Weinstein situation, you understand that that decrease in the sort of barriers to bad behavior start to come down when you are exposed to pornography in large quantities. Loss of interest in other activities. This includes sex, interestingly. People who are married and participate in the watching of pornography on regular occasion tend to be less interested in sex with their spouse. They also tend to find their spouse less attractive. And by the way, I should note here, male and female. The research does not just look at men, although men are the traditional users of pornography. There is a massive increase in young ladies, girls looking at porn beyond what we ever expected to happen. So it's very prominent among young women as well. Cultivation, this is an interesting one I'll mention, that the more you watch sexualized activity, the more you start to think of the world as a sexualized place. And that people are looking for sex, they're thinking through the lens of sex, how to get sex, how to have sex with other people, that the world is highly sexualized. The same thing happens when you watch the news. The news makes you think the world is a much scarier, dangerous place than it really is. Why is that? Because the news shows you scary, dangerous stories. Because that's what will keep you watching the news, which will keep you watching the advertisers, which will get them paid. So cultivation. We are cultivated by pornography into a view of the world as being highly sexualized. All right, let's go to the next slide. I don't want to overwhelm you guys with this. I want to talk to you now about what you can do. This is really important. But before I get to any specifics, let me tell you twice. I'm going to repeat it because it is the key, okay? We know from dozens of years, decades of psychotherapy research, that the most significant change agent in the effectiveness of psychotherapy is the quality of the relationship between therapist and client. No technique, no particular words, active listening, all good, but nothing matters more than the relationship quality between therapist and client. Guess what we also know about pornography? The best enemy, the best combatant against pornography that you can ever create is to have a high-quality, trust-based, intimate relationship with your loved one. The best change agent for your kids, your spouse, your loved one, or yourself overcoming pornography, use, abuse, or addiction is quality relationships. I could bring in truckloads of research to show you this. How do we establish quality relationships with our loved one? There are so many ways, but I'm going to mention just 4 or 5 here, okay? We've already talked about the talk, but I want to be clear about this. You do need to talk to your children and your spouse and your sibling and your uncle and your brother, whoever it might be, your sister, your friend, regularly, but not just the talk about sex. You need to talk to them about how they're doing with their peers at school, because I promise you, if your kid in junior high, and junior high is tough, I have a 12-year-old right now. I think being 13 is the hardest year of age you could ever live, right? It is tough. That kid, if they have a hard day at school and they're feeling down and hurt, that hammer is cocked and it is ready. A parent who sits down with the child and talks about how that day at school went can help to bring that hammer gently back. You need to talk to your children, not just about sex, all the sources of arousal, about cultivation, a culture that is highly sexualized, about forbidden fruit when they watch TV, about peer pressure, about perfectionism, about guilt and shame, about all the things that can contribute to that hammer being pulled back, making it more likely to fire. So please engage your children regularly on all manner of conversations about anything that could arouse them and make it more likely for them to participate in the watching of pornography. Accompany and educate. Now, I don't want you to watch pornography with your loved one, but what I do want you to do is watch everything else you can with your loved ones. A lot of kids sit home after school and watch TV by themselves. They are taught by the TV, and without you there, there's no correction. You are the correcting agent. When kids watch TV, they're exposed to all sorts of fiction. At a very young age, they can't distinguish fiction very well from reality. You're the one who can help them to understand what is going on that is real, that is good, that is bad, that ought to be different, ought to be changed, isn't the way you live, isn't the way your family lives. It's up to you to accompany them. I play video games with my sons. I love it. We have a good time. But every once in a while we're playing a video game and something happens and it's not appropriate. And I talk with them about it. And we also talk about whether we should keep playing the game. I'm with them so they understand I'm going to correct, I'm going to guide, I'm going to converse with them about the things we're doing. All right, real quick, normalize as appropriate. I've mentioned here it's especially important that mothers do this. with their sons. Boys grow up thinking their moms have no sexual appetite that is impure or even pure. We're just scared to think that our moms do anything sexual. I don't know how 8 of us were born in my family of origin. I assume we just came out of petri dishes or something. But if a mom will talk to a son about sex, you can't believe the positive impact that can have. And I think fathers should talk to daughters too. I remember my wife, she's a nurse, so she doesn't mind talking about things, but when one of my sons, he had a little wet dream, and he wasn't sure what to do, and he was trying to hide his sheets, and my wife came into his bedroom and saw that there were no sheets on the bed and quickly surmised what had happened, and she just said, "You know what, son, that's normal. That's a very normal thing to happen." And you could see my son just relieved. Just, oh my gosh, I'm not bad. It's okay. That happens with all of the things that have to do with sex, if we're careful and thoughtful as parents. Okay, real quick, reinforce the positives more than the negatives. I recommend a ratio, and almost all psychologists recommend a ratio of 9 to 1. 9 positives to every 1 negative. If you walk into the room and you see your child watching a good show, reinforce. Tell them how great that is. Congratulate them on that. Strengthen them. If your kid's going out and riding their bike instead of staying in and playing video games, reinforce, reinforce, reinforce. Occasionally you have to be a little negative, you have to punish, but it should be occasional. Reinforcement is so much more effective. And then finally, ally with your loved ones in this battle we're all in. You're not generals back giving orders from way off on some ship here. You are in the trenches with your loved one, with your spouse, with your kids. And the best thing I think you can do is help them understand and believe that they are acceptable. Even if their behavior feels awful and unacceptable to them, they are still acceptable. All right, well, thank you.